Welcome to NewYorkBIO's Emerging Company Showcase, an event series partnered with the New York Stock Exchange to bring New York's financial community together with groundbreaking companies. In the first of two planned events for 2021, we are focusing on European and UK-based companies that could tap the US public markets over the next 12 to 24 months. We appreciate the sponsors of our event series, Woodruff Sawyer, Goodwin, Newmark, Moses & Singer, Trinet, and PHCBI. And now, we have a deeper dive with Carlos Buesa, founder and CEO of Oryzon.
So, Carlos, it's a pleasure to have you here. We're really looking forward to featuring Oryzon on our Emerging Company Showcase that we've partnered with the New York Stock Exchange to put on for the last couple of years. As you know, with this feature, we're actually bringing in companies that are in the UK and the EU into the fold. We had previously just focused on New York companies. And one of the reasons we did this is because more and more companies from the EU are coming to New York to tap the financial markets. And we recognize that the public markets play a really big role in how science is translated. So we've been really fortunate to find a great slate of companies, with yours included, to feature. So thank you very much for joining us here. We wanted to get a little bit into your background and hear a little bit more about the formation of the company.
Thank you very much, Derek. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to be able to showcase the company and the team and the initial spirit to the US investing community. That's
terrific. So if we wind the clock all the way back, Oryzon is now more than 20 years old. It started way back in 2000. So can you take us back a little bit to kind of a bit of your scientific journey on the path to founding the company? Where did the scientific rationale for the company come from, and what were some of your experiences that led to the founding of the company?
Oh, I mean, that's a journey.
Yeah.
Well, I was founding this company more than 20 years ago. I mean, so I was young. My hair was darker. So it was already a while ago. Yeah. So my background, I am a molecular biologist by training. So I was doing my PhD in molecular biology on metabolism, and then I moved to Belgium I did my PhD here in Barcelona in Spain, and then I moved to Belgium to do a postdoc in neurobiology in the School of Medicine in Ghent in Belgium, and it was a very enlightening journey, because besides the obvious process of doing a postdoc and so on, at that moment in this part of Europe, there was a sort of effervescence about creating companies from the university background, something which has been very common and part of the landscape in the US. It was somehow spilling over, transpirating to the other side of the Atlantic. And at that moment, in the early 2000s, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was really a very strong dynamism in many universities in Europe, trying to favorize, to incentivize that young scientists, entrepreneurs with crazy ideas, with probably not yet on their tenure years, so not having this kind of comfortable cushion, could dare to make or to initiate this journey. And so I was one of these young postdocs instilled by this new kind of mode order. And when I came back to Spain, I came with my partner, with my wife, and she's also a scientist, she's also a genetist, and we said, well, why we cannot do in Spain what we have been seeing in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and in the UK, people doing it. So we start, basically refining some ideas about genomics, functional genomics, and we wanted to create a company at that moment that would be instrumental to identify the functions of genes which might be useful for biotechnological purposes, mainly for biomedical purposes. And that was the seminal idea, how all started. And it was a kind of curious journey, because we were, I would say, probably one of the first companies, a handful of companies in Spain, that we were daring to do this. We were, people were looking at us as if we were Martians landing on unheard, you know. I mean,
Mhm.
what these guys are doing, what's their pitch is weird. I mean, they are not talking about only publishing, they are talking about patent applications, they are talking about economical development. So it was a total change of paradigm. I mean, it was for us a way of thinking out of the box. And it's funny because, I mean, all these things you mentioned now, 20 years later, I mean, they are also obvious.
Right.
So,
Now it seems easy, right? But at the
yes,
time, I can imagine, especially in Spain, if it wasn't necessarily normal. I mean, at least if you think about the Netherlands has a deep history in drug development, and it's probably seen as a little more of a rational thing to do. There's probably a bit more of a helpful ecosystem around and people that have done it before. But in Spain, where you looked at as did your colleagues kind of find you crazy? Did anybody tell you this was a crazy idea? Nobody does this.
absolutely, absolutely. But I come from a region of Spain, which we are notoriously stubborn, like a Kentucky mule, you know.
Uh-huh.
So they told us many times, you're going to fail. But I'm going to tell you something. When I leave the academy, I was having a permanent position, and I leave the academy to set up this company when we were only having 3 months of cash.
Mhm.
So we were raising really small money, and I thought, well, that's sufficient. Let's go for it. And here we are, 21 years later.
That's amazing, and it's a great story. So as you started, you started as a service company, as a CRO, right? You were looking for either contracts or anything. So how did you build? Did you start it with? Was it simply you and your wife? Did you have a small team around you? What did it look like at the very beginning, and what were those first couple of years like?
Well, I mean, no, we were starting only my wife and myself. And yes, we were doing, services because we were aware that we couldn't afford to do R&D on
Right.
our own. So it was a way also to guarantee the survival of the company. Also, it was part of a deliberate learning process. So we were very proud of our academic skills, our brave, crazy ideas. But on the other hand, we were absolutely aware that we were totally naive and green in terms of economics and company and business in general. So what we did, and I thought that we were smart and lucky, but both things. We were smart because we recognized from moment zero that we were needing people who were not scientists, who was financial with a financial background.
Yeah.
And we were lucky because we found another guy, young guy, who was as crazy as us, and he quit also his job, and he decided to come and to have fun with us. And so we were paying him less money than what he was actually having, and his current at that moment his current job. But we were offering him a part of the stake on the company, mm-hmm. And we were having such a great fun. I mean, this guy was crazy. He was, showing us all kind of financial solutions. And I remember he was teaching me finances. We were sharing desk. We were not able to afford separate offices. So he was basically teaching me some finances, and I was teaching him some biology. So it was a mm-hmm. kind of cross-pollination. And for that reason, for having this on this moment on day one, this strong financial backbone, we were very soon specialized on surviving. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Surviving is key because, first of all, the story is always written by the survivors, period. And second, if you have a fantastic idea, but you are not flexible enough to survive, you will never be able to materialize this idea. So we were adapting our expectation. We were learning on the process. And at the end of the day, we were making a fantastic journey from being only scientists to become scientists and business people, which is, I think, the combination you need really to have if you want to push a biotechnological business.
It's interesting that you focus on survival. I remember this has to be 10 years ago. There was a leading biotech CEO that was doing kind of an intimate breakfast event, and it was aimed at younger entrepreneurs and people that had started their own companies. And someone asked him, "What's the most important thing to do during the first year of your company?" And he thought about it. And this was a CEO whose company had been through a lot of trouble. And he said, he just kind of slumped his shoulders and just shook his head, and he said, "Survive." He said, you're going to have these plans. and you're going to have stuff that you're going to execute on. And he goes, and that's all fine. He goes, you're going to have things that happen to you that you didn't plan for. He goes, you need to get through that. And he goes, you don't know what it is, and it's going to pop up when you least expect it, but your job is to survive that. And, you know, if you think about the way this business works, it's a very, it's kind of serial progression through things. And you have the markets go crazy. You always need new capital, and you're never really going to know what the next big breakthrough is, or what investors are going to fund, what investors aren't going to fund. And you have to somehow find a way to make it through. So in a lot of ways, biotechnology is a great study in survivorship bias, because you can't pivot and do new things if you can't survive whatever challenges are thrown at you. So, you know, in that vein, you know, you started as a service company. When did you did you ever really think that you would be able to develop your own drugs? Or did you, you know, when you were thinking about this early, did you say, well, it costs, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a drug. We're probably not going to be able to do that, but at least we can do good science. Did you ever think you would have a drug pipeline that you could call your own?
Sure. From minute one. On the other hand, as I said, we were managing expectations. And as my wife used to tell me when she was still on the business, she always tell me, Carlos, you need to learn to choose your battles. So there is something that you need to battle today and something that you need to battle tomorrow. You will get to this bridge. So now focus on, this is something important as well. When you, as a CEO, you need to have a roadmap. You need to have a way of prioritizing things. I mean, maintaining the flexibility to navigate very quickly on the different waters, but at the same time to be able to keep calm, to have a long run sight, but at the same time not to hurry and not to really panic when there is a moment of difficulty, or not to hurry when there is a moment of good news. You know, you need always to get a certain sense of tempo. And yeah, we were always, from minute one, we were always devoting a small amount of our time and energies and resources to do our own research. And it was around 2008, 2009. By that time, we were already venture backed. Some years we had been flirting with break even as a service company. And I said to my board at that moment, listen, guys, I know it can sound weird, but I think that we don't stand a chance as a CRO. I mean, a CRO needs a perpetual race to acquire the latest technology. This technology is very expensive. Every time is more and more processive. So you need to get bigger and bigger clients to basically make this whole thing sensible and so on. So it's a kind of very difficult fight for a company like us, which at that moment we were small, we were 100 people. So I said, I think on the contrary, that we have already the backbone to make a switch and to become a product-oriented company. We have this number of targets which are new. If we go now to the street in Spain and we are able to raise a certain amount of money, we could get molecules in phase 1 in 2 years period. And I was able to convince them with this speech. And then we were switching gears. We were progressively closing down the service division, and we were focusing on the epigenetics, which were the targets that we had identified on our prior period. And at that moment, we were doing also, which was brave, a bit probably bold. We were picking as a target LSD1, which was a very obscure target, recently characterized only 4 years ago in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at Harvard Medical School by Sanji and others. And the biological function of this target was not yet that clear, but we had some preliminary evidences that might be very important to develop a new therapeutic approach on specifically on CNS disorder. It was only later that we became aware that it was also a very cancer-centric asset. So with all this speech, I was able to convince my board, and we were becoming all of a sudden a different company. It was like a rebirth, because a company which was populated at that moment only by biologists, we were incorporating medicinal chemists, pharmacologists, doctors, I mean, all the kind of people the different profiles that you need to make an efficient clinical development, a drug discovery and clinical development company.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the fact that it wasn't a terribly well-known target. It's a strange dichotomy, right? If there are targets that are quote unquote, validated, that you see many people in the field rush into them. I remember a few years ago when people were thinking about immuno-oncology targets to pair with PD-1, it was, LAG3, TIM3, TIGIT, like the targets that everyone was pursuing. You could, it was all the same. It was the same 5 targets, and the whole industry converged on those things. So on one hand, people understood the biology that you were going after, and there was general consensus around why people would go after those targets. The unfortunate downside is that meant the whole industry was going into those targets. So it would be very, very difficult to stand out. The bigger challenge is when you have a target that not everyone goes into, and the potential impact for that when you're kind of the people who are the leaders in a particular area of biology or particular part of the signaling pathway, is that if you get there and you find that there's actually some effect, you're the only game in town. You're the people that have the asset, and really kind of the only asset on the street. And that's actually a really fortunate position to be in. And it's nice to have kind of the background to say, yeah, we believe our biological hypotheses here. So while you were actually servicing customers, I imagine you basically had your own underlying R&D that basically gave you a little bit more insight into these targets.
Yeah, we did actually, and all the story began when we were doing a sort of genomic survey on postmortem brains from people that had died recently without signs of obvious neurodegenerative diseases. But when with these tissues, these slices were examined at the microscope, we identify the initial lesions of Alzheimer's, of dementia, Lewy bodies, Parkinson's, so on and so forth. So we were doing genomics around these pieces of the brain that they were showing this initial onset of pathological events, and yeah, LSD1 was there. So we thought LSD1 has to be playing a role on this. So it was clear that LSD1 was also a partner with HDAC1 and HDAC2, and the relation between HDAC and neurodegeneration had been established in the field for already some years. So the whole story, the whole hypothesis was making sense. And with that and a few more data, we were really starting our decision to pursue this as a meaningful target. And obviously, very soon after that, there were coming more and more data from people working on the cancer area, showing that that LSD1 was also playing a very important role there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, that's an incredibly hard transition to make, and now you have both the benefit and the challenge of being a clinical stage company, right? So now you have this entire clinical development plan in front of you. You have several trials underway. So you look at where the company came from, and now I suppose you look around you and you say, well, I now have all of these other challenges to thank for my daringness and our advancement in biology. It's incredibly rare that people are actually able to play out the hypothesis of, we're going to be a data-driven company and we're going to transition from a service model into a discovery model and ultimately into a clinical model. There's very few companies that do that transition well.
Yeah, no, there are few. And in our case, as I said, we were starting from scratch with a piece of paper. So all the chemistry we were doing several approaches at that moment. We had at the company crystallography, we had fragment screening technology, we have a number of molecular modeling platforms and so on. So we were starting doing a multiple approach to get as fast as possible the composition of matter of the first selective and potent inhibitors, and we were very successful, and we were moving very fast. We were colonizing the IP, the IP landscape. So, and we were protecting all the chemistry territory. So we were lucky in that respect because we were setting the foundations for I wouldn't say dominant, because that probably would be too bold, but a very strong position on the field for the years to come, no? And yeah, this is amazing because this transition has been a fantastic transition, has been a wonderful journey from a pure biologist company to a drug discovery company. Then we were doing the early clinical trials, and on the early clinical trials, we were doing what it was called here internally, we still call it like that, sort of translational medicine trials, in which what you are looking is for a signal to demonstrate that what you have seen on the mice or what you have seen on the cell culture is also seen on a human patient, but not with the aspiration yet to build the basis for a regulatory path. So all this has been done on these last years, and right now the company is in another transition. So we have already clear signals of clinical activity in real world human patients in both in oncology and in CNS. And what we have right now is a new journey, which is becoming a company which develops clinically the assets to get the approval, and that's what we are right now.
You know, there's a saying in sports that in hitting a round ball with a round bat squarely is one of the hardest feats to do in all of athletics. And I would say that the parallel here is transitioning from in vivo data from animal models and cell culture and actually seeing that data reflected in human clinical trials is likewise one of the hardest things to do scientifically, and certainly one of the biggest challenges that we face as an industry and as people who want to see medicines get developed. And all things being equal, I would also say that that's much harder than hitting a baseball with a round bat. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how far Spain has come in terms of entrepreneurship and in terms of launching companies. I imagine that you and your team are really kind of a great example to everyone around you. And do you feel that the environment is different than when you first started?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The country has made a gigantic leap forward. So when we were starting, it was really funny because nobody really understood the business model of the biotech. So we were getting the help of some university officials that they wanted to have their first startup, the first companies coming up from the university. And it was funny because they were not really, fetching the business concept, So this is not anymore the situation. We have got in Spain some few examples of success. So there was a company based in Madrid that was acquiring a company in Belgium, and then they became listed in Nasdaq and finally acquired by Takeda. So we have PharmaMar right now that has got an approval of the FDA for an anti-oncologic agent, lurbinectedin. And we are already having a number of companies which are basically catching the attention of syndicate of investors, international investors with very sounded series A, B, and C. So there is right now a very, I would say, dynamic and vibrant ecosystem in Spain. People in Spain is very hard worker. If we have a flaw, is that we are not that well organized, but we are really hard workers. So I think that people is enthusiastic, and there is very good science in Spain. So there is the possibility to set the foundations for companies with brilliant ideas. And our challenge right now is to be able to make these ideas grow, to make these companies to be able to make this transition from this kind of emerging university companies to real companies, to companies that they can go to the markets, and companies that they can go all the way around to get a drug approved, or they can be at the end of the day acquired by a big guy, by a big pharma company. I think that we are right now on this second part of this process, and that we are going to see more and more Spanish companies and science coming from Spain, more in the international circuit, which is basically making things normal, what it corresponds for a European mid-sized country like Spain, which is, not that behind of France or the Netherlands or Germany, if you want to mention just a few,
Yep. Well, when we started thinking about these programs and these type of events, it's with the the recognition that great science can come from anywhere. Science is a global industry, and it can be fostered anywhere. That due to the scale and the reach of scientific publications, anyone can find the latest scientific data so long as they have access to the internet. And when you do that, you foster the ability to do great science outside of the quote unquote typical areas where it's developed. And I think given the way that the industry operates now, it's really now a global innovation industry. There's no one place that has either a stranglehold or any limitations in terms of where innovation can come from. And the way that we looked at this is the New York investment community and the public markets, they look for great companies, and we fully recognize that those great companies don't necessarily have to exist in New York. They don't have to exist in Boston or San Francisco. They can exist just about anywhere. And we've kind of taken it on ourselves to say, how can we highlight some of the companies that we think are doing excellent things around the globe. So you certainly qualify as one of those folks. We're really thrilled to have you with us, and I can't wait to see you present on the 23rd. So Carlos, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your story. I wish you buena suerte, and I'm excited to see everything that you do at the company. See.
Thank you very much. I didn't know that you have your Spanish there.
Solamente un poquito.
Muy bien, muy bien. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on A Deeper Dive. We're looking forward to the Emerging Company Showcase on June 23rd. Special thanks again to our sponsors, and for more info, visit us on www.newyorkbio.org or on Twitter @NewYorkBio.